This is a hobby author publishing presentation, where my hobby is your entertainment.
Welcome back to Shadows of Secrets. The hunt has led to a discovery beyond their darkest imaginings. Meticulously detailed plans for a heist on the royal palace. But the most terrifying secret was not the target, but the architect. The arcane signature woven into the plans belongs to only one person, Gerrod's lost mother, Elysia. Today, in Chapter 10, Ravenshadow Echoes, Gerrod must grapple with this devastating truth. Who was his mother truly? And what is her connection to the legendary bloodthirsty assassins known only as the Ravenshadows?
Chapter 10, Ravenshadow Echoes. The flickering lamplight cast long, dancing shadows, distorting the familiar lines of Ace's face as he wrestled with the implications. "The crown, Gerrod," he insisted, his voice a low, urgent growl, stabbing a thick finger towards the blueprints. "That's the target. Don't matter who drew the map. If the Temptress has these, she's going for it. For the Myster, for chaos, for whatever damned reason. We can't just ignore that. The kingdom. And what if the kingdom isn't the Myster's true target?" Gerrod interrupted, his voice steadier now, infused with a desperate clarity born of the revelation. He met Ace's gaze, his green eyes burning with newfound, agonizing purpose. "My mother. She understood balance. She revered ancient magic, yes, but she wasn't driven by greed or a lust for chaos. Stealing the crown? Destabilizing the realm? It doesn't fit what I knew of her, Ace. Unless," he hesitated, the thought painful, "unless she was manipulated. Unless the Myster is using her legacy, her knowledge, for his own ends without understanding her original purpose." He looked down at the intricate plans, the ghost of his mother's magic still seeming to shimmer just beyond perception. These plans, they feel old. The signature felt like an echo. Perhaps they were contingency, created for a different reason entirely, now twisted by the Myster or the Temptress. He pushed away from the vat rim, pacing the small clear space in the cellar. Stopping the heist deals with the symptom, but not the disease. If Elysia is involved, if she's alive, understanding why is paramount. What was her true goal? Is the Temptress her agent, her jailer, her successor? Or something else entirely? "And while we're chasing ghosts and asking why," Ace countered, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction, "the Temptress could be waltzing out of the palace with the crown jewels tucked under her spooky cloak. We risk everything chasing maybes." "We risk more by acting blindly," Gerrod retorted. "Interfering without understanding could trigger something worse, could play right into the Myster's hands, or even endanger Elysia if she is alive and being coerced." He stopped pacing, facing his friend directly. "I need to know, Ace. I need to understand her. I believe the answers lie with Elysia, not just with the immediate threat of the heist. We need context before we blunder in." Ace looked at the anguish etched onto Gerrod's face, the profound shock giving way to a desperate, almost fragile resolve. He sighed, the sound heavy in the damp air. His pragmatic instincts screamed to focus on the tangible threat, the palace vault. But he knew Gerrod. He saw the shift, the way this discovery had rewired his friend's entire world. And perhaps Gerrod was right. The Moonrat connection, Elysia's signature, the sheer audacity, it felt like more than just the Myster's usual skullduggery. "All right, Elf," Ace conceded gruffly, rubbing his temples. "All right. Against me better judgment. We follow the ghost. We try to understand your mother's plan. But if we get even a whiff that this heist is happening now, then we adapt," Gerrod finished, nodding sharply, a grim determination settling over his features. "But first, we find Elysia. Or we find out what happened to her. That's the only way to truly understand what we're facing." The blueprints lay silent on the vat rim, a map leading not just to a vault, but into the shadowed heart of a decades-old mystery. The heavy weight of the palace blueprints seemed to anchor them to the foul reality of the tannery cellar. Ace carefully rolled the parchments, his usual gruff movements imbued with a newfound reverence and caution, tying them securely with the leather thong. He tucked the roll alongside the Moonrat tools and cloaks back into the lead-lined cache, securing the false bottom of the vat with a soft click. The immediate evidence of the heist plot was hidden, but its implications lingered, poisoning the air more effectively than the chemical stench. "So," Ace said, wiping his grimy hands on his equally grimy tunic, his gaze fixed on Gerrod. "We hunt a ghost. Where do we even begin looking for traces of your mother from? What, 5-10 years ago? After Verdant Haven, before whatever happened next." Gerrod leaned against the damp cellar wall of the rusted flagon, the initial shock slowly receding, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. The image of his mother's arcane signature overlaid on the vault plans was burned into his mind, a devastating mystery demanding resolution. "She returned to Oswegonia," he stated, the words clipped, precise. After she left me there. That's what the Whispers always said. She came back here to the city of her youth." "Oswegonia's a big cesspit," Ace countered pragmatically, pulling out the Moonrat cipher wheel again, turning it absently in his hands. "And if she was tied up with the Moonrats even back then, she wouldn't exactly have been announcing her return at the city gates or signing lodging registers." He frowned. "Old guild contacts? Most who knew the Moonrats are long dead or dust in the wind. Records from that era? Patchy at best, and certainly not detailing the movements of shadow folk." Gerrod pushed away from the wall. "The Moonrats are the key," he insisted. "Her signature on those plans, the temptress using their methods, their tools, their haunts. The connection is undeniable. If Elysia returned, if she reconnected with them, someone from that time might remember. Someone who knew the guild, knew its members, its secrets." He looked at Ace, hope flickering faintly in his eyes. "You're past, Ace. The guilds you knew, the people you ran with back then. Is there anyone left who might have known the Moonrats, known her?" Ace sighed, the sound heavy. "Maybe. It's a long shot, Gerrod. Memories fade, loyalties shift, people disappear. But," he tapped the cipher wheel, "this level of planning, this legacy, it suggests organization, continuity. Maybe some threads weren't entirely cut." He tucked the wheel away again. "There are a few names. Old-timers, information brokers who deal in ancient history and forgotten grudges. Risky, expensive, but it's a start." Their focus shifted definitively, turning away from the immediate threat of the palace heist towards the deeper, more personal enigma of Elysia's lost years in Oswegonia. The damp chill of the cellar seemed to seep deeper, mirroring the cold uncertainty of their new path. The faint scent of stale beer and earth couldn't quite mask the lingering phantom smell of ancient parchment and hidden secrets. Ace ran a hand over his beard, his expression grim. "Old-timers and brokers, they're slippery eels, Gerrod. Might sell us out quicker than sell us truth." He kicked absently at a loose stone on the floor. "There's another way. Maybe cleaner, maybe worse. Records." Gerrod looked up, latching onto the word. "City records?" "Aye, the City Watch archives, down by the garrison. They keep logs, arrests, incident reports, patrols. Maybe something about Moonrat activity back then got officially noted, even if it was dismissed as petty crime." Ace grimaced. "Problem is, those archives ain't exactly a lending library. Restricted access. Guards thicker than fleas on a beggar's dog. Getting in, finding anything useful from 5 years ago, it's near impossible without official clearance or a damned good reason." He paused, considering. "Or there used to be a scribes' hall, where the major guilds kept shared records, contracts, disputes. Mostly defunct now, probably looted or crumbling. But if any records of the Moonrats as a guild exist anywhere..." Gerrod weighed the options. Official archives meant navigating bureaucracy and guards, drawing unwanted attention. Guild remnants meant delving into potentially dangerous, forgotten corners of the city. Both paths were fraught with risk. If the Moonrats were involved in something sensitive enough for Elysia to contribute her skills, Gerrod mused, official records might be sanitized or coded. The Guild's own records, however fragmented, might hold more unfiltered truth. The thought of uncovering fragments of his mother's hidden life within dusty, forgotten ledgers tightened his chest. The scribe's hall seems the more likely place for unguarded details, however faint. The air in the rusted flagon cellar felt heavy, thick with unspoken fears and the daunting task ahead. Finding whispers of Elysia after all these years seemed like chasing smoke, but the scribe's hall offered a tangible, if decaying, starting point. The old scribe's hall then, Ace confirmed, pushing himself to his feet. Used to be near the juristic court before the new wing was built. Probably half collapsed by now. He retrieved a small pouch of coins from his belt, weighing it thoughtfully. Might still be someone keeping an eye on the place, though. An old clerk put out to pasture, maybe, looking for a few coppers to keep the rats fed. Their journey took them towards the imposing soot-stained buildings of the city's legal quarter. Tucked away down a narrow, cobbled side street, overshadowed by newer, grander structures, stood the Scribes' Hall. It slumped like an old man weary of standing, its stone facade crumbling, windows boarded or broken, the heavy oak door scarred and weather-beaten. It radiated an aura of profound neglect. As Ace predicted, an ancient, wizened man sat on a stool just inside the shadowed portico, wrapped in layers of threadbare wool despite the mild night. He peered at them suspiciously through watery eyes as they approached, clutching a gnarled wooden staff. "Place is closed," the old man croaked, his voice dry as old parchment. "Been closed for years. Nothing here but dust and memories." Ace offered a disarming, gap-toothed smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just hoping to look at some old memories, Graybeard," he said, his voice adopting the easy cadence of the streets. He let a few silver coins clink meaningfully in his palm. "Looking for records pertaining to old guild business. Minor stuff from way back. The Moonrat name mean anything to ya?" The old man's watery eyes sharpened slightly at the name, a flicker of ancient recognition. He eyed the silver hungrily, then glanced nervously back towards the dark interior. "Moonrats. Aye, troublesome little vermin. Records are chaos back there. Rats. Damp." He coughed, a rattling sound. "Dangerous." "We'll be careful," Ace assured him, pressing the silver coins into the man's gnarled hand. "Just need an hour. Quick look. No trouble." The old caretaker hesitated, then pocketed the coins with surprising speed. He shuffled towards the heavy door, producing a large, rusty iron key. With a groan of protesting metal, the lock turned. He pushed the door inward, revealing a vast, dark hall thick with the suffocating scent of dust, decay, and decomposing paper. "An hour," he rasped. "Then out. And don't touch nothing valuable. Not that there is any." He shuffled back to his stool, leaving them to brave the archive's dusty embrace. The Scribes' Hall swallowed them whole. Dust motes danced thick as summer insects in the few shafts of moonlight piercing the grime-caked upper windows. Towering shelves, warped and leaning precariously, lined the vast hall, crammed with decomposing ledgers, scroll cases spilling brittle parchment, and stacks of paper bound in rotting leather. The air tasted thick and dry, the silence profound, broken only by the whisper of their own movements and the occasional scuttling of unseen creatures within the walls. Guided by Ace's fragmented memories of guild organization, they focused on the sections likely dedicated to the lesser, now defunct guilds. It was slow, painstaking work. Many records had turned to dust or fused into solid blocks by damp and neglect. Others were written in faded ink or indecipherable script. They scanned endless lists of names, minor contracts, territorial disputes, looking for any mention of Moonrat or names Ace vaguely recalled from that era. Hours seemed to pass in the dusty gloom. Frustration mounted. Then, buried deep within a moldering ledger detailing minor smuggling infractions from roughly 5 years prior, Gerrod's sharp eyes caught it. Tucked away in a list of individuals questioned but not charged regarding contraband smuggled through the East Warren slums was a name that made his breath catch. Elysia. No surname given, just the single name, appended with a brief note. Known associate of Silk and Gutter Rat. Moonrat affiliation suspected. Released, insufficient evidence. He froze, pointing a trembling finger at the entry. Ace leaned close, squinting at the faded script. Silk? Gutter Rat? Ace frowned, dredging his memory. Vaguely recall those names. Low-level Moonrat operatives, fences maybe. Gone missing years ago, like most of them. He looked at the entry again. So, she was back, and she did connect with them, right after leaving Verdant Haven. It wasn't much, a single mention, a suspected affiliation, quickly dismissed by the Watch. But it was tangible proof. Elysia had returned to Oswegonia, and her path had immediately crossed with the very guild whose methods and secrets now seemed intertwined with the Temptress and the plot against the crown. The faint trace felt monumental, a concrete link confirming the rumors and deepening the mystery of her actions during those lost years. The single line mentioning Elysia felt like a lightning strike in the dusty gloom, validating the rumors while opening a floodgate of new questions. Energized despite the late hour and suffocating air, they pressed on, delving deeper into the subsequent months and years recorded in the crumbling ledgers. The brittle pages whispered of escalating tensions in the underworld, minor guild skirmishes flaring into coordinated assaults, smuggling operations shifting hands with brutal efficiency. Amidst dry accounts of turf wars and unsolved accidents, a new thread emerged, thin at first, easily dismissed. Tucked into watch reports about unusually disciplined gang activity or the sudden disappearance of established fences, hesitant phrases appeared. Informant speaks fearfully of a master of shadows. Victim claims coercion by agents of the shadow broker. Rumors attribute recent warehouse fire to the Myster. Gerrod pointed to an entry detailing a violent takeover of the dockside gambling dens. The official scribe noted, witnesses recanted initial statements, now claiming simple gang rivalry. Underworld chatter regarding Shadow Myster deemed unreliable. Yet the chatter persisted, growing less dismissive in later reports. The name solidified. The Shadow Myster. His documented emergence, initially disregarded as street legend, began within months of Elysia's brief, recorded interaction with the Moonrats. Ace traced the timeline with a grimy finger across the decaying pages. Elysia arrives, reconnects with Moonrats. Then, almost immediately, the Shadow Myster starts his methodical, terrifying consolidation of power from unseen depths. Coincidence? Or did Elysia's return somehow herald, or perhaps even enable the rise of the very entity whose network now threatened the kingdom? The timing felt chillingly precise, another dark knot in the tangled history they were desperately trying to unravel. Following the nascent whispers of the Shadow Myster's rise, they pushed deeper into the subsequent years documented in the crumbling archives. Mentions of the Moonrats, always sparse, continued for a time. Petty theft, minor espionage, names like Silk appearing occasionally in association with low-level contraband busts. Then, abruptly, the narrative shifted. Within the span of what appeared to be only a few months, according to the ledger dates, the scattered references to Moonrat activity ceased almost entirely. Instead, they found fragmented, chaotic reports documenting violent incidents centered around known Moonrat haunts in the East Warren slums. An entry described a tenement fire ruled accidental despite whispers of locked doors and unnatural cold spots reported by fleeing neighbors. Another detailed a brutal back alley massacre, the few terrified witnesses speaking of attackers who moved like shadows and struck with impossible speed, leaving no survivors among the suspected Moonrat victims before vanishing without a trace. One particularly chilling report, heavily redacted and marked unsubstantiated, Underworld fantasy, quoted a captured smuggler babbling about a Moonrat safehouse being torn apart from the inside by angry ghosts after its occupants crossed the new master. The official conclusion dismissed it as delirium. Ace ran a hand over a page, detailing the discovery of several known Moonrat operatives found dead in a sealed cellar, showing no obvious signs of violence, but frozen in expressions of abject terror. This wasn't a guild war, he breathed, his voice grim. This was extermination, swift, brutal. He looked at Gerrod, the implication hanging heavy in the dusty air. Supernatural, he added, echoing the frightened whispers from the past. The Moonrats hadn't just faded away. They were systematically, terrifyingly erased, shortly after the Shadow Myster began his ascent, and not long after Elysia's brief reappearance among them. The official records offered no clear culprit for the Moonrats' sudden demise, attributing the violence to generic gang warfare or dismissing eyewitness accounts as unreliable fantasy. But Ace, digging deeper into less formal archives, collections of confiscated informant letters, transcripts of interrogations deemed inadmissible, found recurring, frightened whispers that diverged from the official narrative. These weren't watch reports, but the raw, unfiltered lore of the Underworld itself, passed down in hushed tones. Scrawled on the back of a seized gambling tally, Ace found a cryptic note. Moonrats gone. Not rivals, something else. Black feathers seen near the fire. R.S. Another fragment, torn from a smuggler's journal, spoke of the East Warren massacre. They moved like wind, silent killers, wore no colors but shadow, heard one whisper. Ravenshadow claims this debt. The name appeared only a handful of times, shrouded in fear and superstition. The Ravenshadow. They were spoken of not as a typical guild, but as something older, more akin to a near-mythical order of assassins or enforcers, legendary for their brutal efficiency, absolute secrecy, and mastery of stealth that bordered on the unnatural. The accounts matched the descriptions of the swift, devastating attacks that had eradicated the Moonrats, attacks characterized by terrifying speed and silence. Ravenshadow, Ace murmured, showing the fragments to Gerrod. Never heard of 'em myself, not really. More boogeymen than guild, used to scare new recruits. Yet, the consistency in these fragmented, terrified accounts suggested more than just legend. If true, it meant the Moonrats weren't just crushed by the rising Shadow Myster. They were annihilated by a specific, near-mythical faction known for ruthless, shadowy work. Another deadly player had been moving in the darkness during that critical period, their motives and allegiances unknown. They gathered the fragmented pieces of information, the official reports, the confiscated notes, the terrified whispers, laying them out mentally in the dusty silence of the scribe's hall. The timeline that emerged was stark, brutal, and deeply unsettling. First, Elysia returns to Oswegonia after years away, her presence briefly noted in connection with known Moonrat figures. She possesses unique arcane knowledge, potentially the very knowledge needed to plan something as audacious as the palace heist detailed in the blueprints. Second, almost immediately following her reappearance, the first mentions of the Shadow Myster surface. An unknown entity begins a methodical, ruthless consolidation of underworld power, operating from the shadows with terrifying efficiency. Third, within months, or perhaps a year or two of the Myster's emergence, the Moonrats, the very guild Elysia contacted upon her return, are suddenly and brutally exterminated. Not gradually pushed out, but systematically annihilated in swift, violent attacks attributed by Underworld whispers to the near-mythical Ravenshadows, masters of stealth and assassination. The sequence was undeniable, the proximity of events too coincidental to ignore. Elysia's return seemed intrinsically linked to the seismic shifts that followed. Was she a catalyst? A victim? Did she bring knowledge that inadvertently fueled the Myster's rise? Was her connection to the Moonrats the reason for their destruction, perhaps silenced by the Myster himself, or eliminated by the mysterious Ravenshadows for reasons unknown? Or, the most chilling thought, was she somehow connected to the Ravenshadows herself? The discovery of Elysia's signature on the palace blueprints now felt less like a starting point and more like a single, explosive piece in a much larger, older, and deadlier puzzle. The Shadow Myster, the Temptress, the Moonrats, the Ravenshadows, and Elysia all seemed caught in a complex, violent web spun years ago, the true nature of which remained terrifyingly obscure. Ace leaned back against a leaning stack of ledgers, dust motes swirling around him in the faint moonlight. His usual gruff demeanor was gone, replaced by a deep unease that tightened the lines around his eyes and mouth. He rubbed his beard, the gesture betraying his agitation. Ravenshadows, he repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Gods, I'd almost convinced myself they were just stories. Gerrod looked at him, sensing the shift. You knew of them? Knew of them? Ace scoffed, a humorless sound. Not like you know the Bakers Guild or the Dockworkers Union, elf. They weren't visible. No turf, no colors, no known leaders. They were the whispers behind the whispers. The story old thieves told green kids to keep them from getting too bold. The ultimate bogeymen. He shook his head, remembering fragments from his own past, long after the Moonrats were gone. Even when I was running my own crew, years later, you'd hear things. Impossible assassinations where the victim was locked in a guarded room. Information brokers disappearing without a trace, leaving only a single black feather behind. Sabotage jobs that crippled rivals overnight, done with surgical precision. He met Gerrod's gaze, his own eyes dark with remembered fear. No one ever claimed credit, no one ever saw them clearly, but the name always lingered in the shadows, Ravenshadows. If they wanted you gone, you were gone. If they wanted something kept quiet, it stayed quiet. He looked down at his calloused hands. To think they were real and active back then, decimating the Moonrats. The knowledge cast a colder but deadlier pall over their investigation than even the Shadow Myster or the enigmatic Temptress. The Ravenshadows represented a different kind of threat. Older, perhaps, more deeply rooted, and utterly ruthless. The name Ravenshadows echoed unpleasantly in the dusty silence, adding a layer of primal fear to the already complex mystery. If this near-mythical faction was involved, understanding their role became critical. Spurred by Ace's unease, they redirected their search, moving away from Moonrat and Myster timelines to hunt for any official or unofficial mention of this shadowy third party. It was like searching for a specific grain of sand on a windswept beach. The official City Watch archives, meticulously scanned earlier, offered nothing. Crimes attributed to them were either dismissed as rumor, assigned to unknown perpetrators, or blamed on conventional guild rivals. There were no arrest records, no confiscated banners, no known safe houses logged. Officially, the Ravenshadows did not exist. They turned back to the less formal records, the confiscated letters, the fragments of journals, the transcripts of unreliable informant debriefings that Ace had sifted through earlier. The mentions were incredibly scarce, fleeting, and wrapped in superstition. A terrified merchant spoke of paying protection money to avoid the feathered men. A coded message between smugglers warned of avoiding the Crow's Nest District after dark, RS watching. A single, hastily scribbled note found on a dead informant simply read, "They see everything. Burn this." No names, no locations beyond vague warnings, no indication of hierarchy or motive. It was as if the Ravenshadows moved through the city's history like ghosts, leaving behind only fear, whispers, and the occasional cryptic reference. Their ability to operate with such brutal efficiency while maintaining near-total anonymity was deeply unsettling. Unlike the Myster who built a network, or the Moonrats who left traces, the Ravenshadows seemed masters of erasure, both of their victims and of themselves. Their connection to the Moonrat massacre seemed undeniable based on Underworld lore, but finding any further link, any clue to their identity or purpose, felt like grasping at smoke. The dead ends in the scribe's hall left a residue of frustration and unease. The Ravenshadows remained ghosts, their role in the Moonrat massacre a terrifying but unsubstantiated whisper. Yet, the connection felt too strong to ignore. If the Ravenshadows were responsible, perhaps they'd left a trace, however small, at the scene of their work, the derelict Moonrat Guild Hall where they'd found the cipher wheel. "We missed something," Gerrod stated quietly, the conviction clear in his voice as they stood once more amidst the decaying ledgers. "Back there, at the Guild Hall. We searched for the wheel, for the key. We didn't look for signs of the attack itself, signs of who attacked." Ace nodded grimly. The thought of returning again to that unsettling place curdled his stomach. But Gerrod was right. Their previous searches had been focused on the Temptress and the cipher. They hadn't been looking for evidence of a decade-old massacre or clues to the identity of near-mythical assassins. "All right," he sighed. "One more trip into the dustbin. But this time, we look closer. Scorch marks, old bloodstains hidden under the grime, stray weapon fragments, anything that speaks of that final fight." Their third entry into the Moonrat building felt different. Less like infiltration, more like archaeology, sifting through the layers of decay for evidence of violent history. They brought the oil lamp this time, needing better light than faint moonbeams filtering through cracks. Ace focused on the main hall, examining walls for embedded projectiles, pry marks on sealed doors, or scorches inconsistent with accidental fire. Gerrod moved towards the back rooms, areas they'd only glanced into before. He ran his hands along walls, peered into collapsed cellars through holes in the floor, his senses alert for anything unnatural, lingering cold spots, faint metallic scents beneath the dust, unnatural patterns in the decay. He pushed aside a rotten timber blocking a doorway, revealing a smaller chamber, possibly an old records room or office, its contents pulped by damp and time. The air here felt particularly heavy, still. Gerrod swept the lamplight across the floor of the small back room, illuminating piles of pulped paper, shattered pottery, and the skeletal remains of wooden furniture. Near the far wall, half buried beneath a fall of ceiling plaster and rotten laths, something glinted dully. It wasn't stone or wood. He cautiously approached, using a piece of fallen timber to push aside the debris. Lying partially concealed was a broken blade. Just the hilt and about 6 inches of dark, rusted metal remained, the rest snapped off cleanly long ago. The hilt itself was simple, practical, wrapped in remnants of what might have been dark leather cord, now mostly disintegrated. Based on the size and style, it looked like a typical Moonrat fighting knife. Light, quick, easily concealable. Another sad relic of the guild's demise. Gerrod reached down to pick it up, intending to examine the break. As his fingers closed around the hilt, he felt something rough beneath the decay. Holding the lamp closer, he brushed away decades of grime from the metal pommel and the base of the blade where it met the hilt guard. Etched into the metal, incredibly fine and almost obscured by rust and pitting, was a symbol. It wasn't the familiar Moonrat crescent and rat. This was different. It was a stylized bird's talon, depicted gripping a single, jagged shard, almost like a broken piece of obsidian or dark glass. The etching was precise, clearly deliberate, added after the knife's original forging. He held it out as Ace entered the small room. "Ace, look at this." Ace took the broken hilt, turning it in the lamplight. He squinted at the faint etching. "Moonrat knife, no doubt," he confirmed. "But this mark." He rubbed at it with his thumb. "Never seen it before. Not guild standard." He paused, the implications dawning. "A personal mark? Or something added?" His gaze sharpened. A broken Moonrat blade, found amidst the ruins of their final stand, bearing an unfamiliar predatory symbol etched near the hilt. It felt significant, a tangible piece of the puzzle amidst the whispers and shadows. Ace carried the broken blade fragment back into the main hall, where the moonlight offered slightly better, if colder, illumination than the single oil lamp. He spat on a relatively clean scrap of his tunic and began carefully rubbing away the ingrained grime and tenacious rust covering the faint etching near the hilt. Gerrod watched intently, the silence stretching, amplifying the soft rasp of cloth against pitted metal. Slowly, painstakingly, more details of the symbol emerged from beneath the layers of time and decay. The etching was indeed fine, clearly done by a skilled hand. What Gerrod had initially perceived as a talon gripping a shard resolved into something more complex as Ace cleaned it. It wasn't just a talon. Connected to it, overlapping slightly, was the unmistakable shape of stylized feathers. The leading edge of a bird's wing, rendered with sharp, angular lines suggesting speed and predatory grace. The wing partially covered and seemed to emanate from a jagged, abstract shape beneath it, like a shard of obsidian, or perhaps a stylized representation of a deep shadow. A raven's wing, a jagged shadow. Ace held the hilt out, turning it so the faint moonlight caught the cleaned etching clearly. Ravenshadows, he breathed, the name barely a whisper, but heavy with certainty. The fragmented accounts, the underworld lore, the whispers of black feathers, it all coalesced around this single, concrete symbol. This wasn't just a Moonrat knife broken in the fight. It was a trophy, or perhaps a warning, marked by their killers. They held physical proof, however small and rusted, that the near-mythical Ravenshadows were not only real, but had been present, intimately involved in the destruction of the Moonrats. The ghost story had just become terrifyingly tangible. Ace stared at the Ravenshadow symbol etched onto the broken Moonrat blade, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. The specific style of the etching, the sharp, angular lines of the wing, the jagged, almost crystalline depiction of the shadow, tugged at a deeply buried memory, something unconnected to the Ravenshadow legend itself. It wasn't the symbol's meaning, but its artistry, its specific aesthetic. He frowned, rubbing his beard, his mind sifting through decades of navigating Oswegonia's hidden corners. Where had he seen that style before? Not on guild banners or watch insignia. Not in the grand carvings of the noble districts or the crude graffiti of the slums. It was something different, older. "This carving style," he muttered, more to himself than Gerrod. "Those sharp edges, the way it cuts into the metal, it reminds me of something." He closed his eyes, picturing crumbling stonework, forgotten archways, places long abandoned even when he was young. The old wards, maybe? Not the big magical ones, but the smaller protective glyphs you sometimes see carved over doorways in the really ancient districts. Places down south, near the old wall foundations, or up in the Undercroft ruins beneath the Grand Temple. He opened his eyes, meeting Gerrod's questioning gaze. Places nobody goes anymore, predating most of the guilds, predating even the current city layout in some cases. There are old stones there, carvings, some have that same sharp, jagged feel to them, like they were cut with ice, not chisels. He looked back at the symbol on the hilt, a new, uncertain possibility forming. If the Ravenshadows used this symbol and this style, Maybe they aren't just mythical assassins. Maybe they're tied to something much older, something rooted in the city's forgotten foundations. The lead was tenuous, based on a vague resemblance in artistic style, but it pointed towards a new direction. The oldest, most derelict parts of Oswegonia, where history itself lay buried. Gerrod pulled out the faded, meticulously detailed city map they carried, a valuable piece of Underworld intel Ace had acquired years ago. They spread it carefully across a relatively clean section of floor in the scribe's hall, using scavenged stones to hold down the brittle corners. Ace pointed to the symbol on the knife fragment, then traced a finger across the map, searching for areas matching the style he vaguely recalled. Old wall foundations. Undercroft. He muttered, scanning the map's ancient annotations. The southern districts held remnants of the earliest city walls, marked by thick lines and faded boundary symbols. The area beneath the Grand Temple was labeled Undercroft with a stylized skull and crossbones, signifying danger or taboo. Neither seemed a precise match for the symbol's unique style, though they shared a general aura of ancient decay. Then Ace's finger paused, hovering over a section marked Aviary District. It lay outside the main city walls, near the eastern edge, once a grand aviary and gardens for nobility, now marked on the map as largely undeveloped and avoided. The legend accompanying it noted, abandoned, collapsed structures, area deemed hazardous due to structural instability and unusual occurrences. Gerrod leaned closer, studying the Aviary District's layout on the map. It was depicted with irregular lines, indicating ruins, and a small, stylized symbol nestled amongst them, a single, prominent, angular structure. Beside it, almost faded into the paper, was a symbol Gerrod recognized from the knife, a stylized bird's wing, similar in its sharp, angular lines to the one etched onto the blade fragment. The aviary, Gerrod murmured, confirming the vague visual match. A place avoided, rumored to be cursed. Ace nodded grimly. I never went there myself. Too many ghost stories, even for me. Old breeding grounds for birds of prey, they say. Abandoned after some plague, or maybe something worse. He looked from the map back to the symbol on the knife. Ravenshadows. Aviary District. It fits. A place of birds, shadows, and bad luck. Maybe that's where they roost. A chilling possibility solidified. The Ravenshadows, the destroyers of the Moonrats, might be linked to this desolate, potentially cursed district. And if they were, finding them might lead to answers about Elysia and the Temptress. The potential link between the Ravenshadows and the shunned Aviary District cast a new, chilling light on the sequence of events etched in the crumbling records. If the Ravenshadows, with their ancient symbol and ruthless methods, were based in or connected to that desolate place, their involvement in the Moonrat massacre took on a different dimension. Gerrod stared at the map, the location of the Aviary District burning itself into his mind alongside the image of his mother's arcane signature. The timeline replayed itself again. Elysia returns, connects with Moonrats, Myster rises. Moonrats are brutally exterminated by forces associated with the Ravenshadow symbol. Ravenshadow symbol potentially linked to the ancient, cursed Aviary District. Where did Elysia fit? The initial assumption that she was somehow allied with or manipulated by the Shadow Myster suddenly felt incomplete, possibly naive. If the powerful Ravenshadows were the ones who destroyed the Moonrats, perhaps they were acting independently of the Myster, or even against him. If the Ravenshadows destroyed the Moonrats, Gerrod voiced the question aloud, his voice low and strained. What happened to Elysia? He looked at Ace, the possibilities branching into equally terrifying paths. Was she caught in the crossfire, silenced along with the guild she'd just contacted, a victim of their ruthlessness? The thought of his mother meeting such a violent end sent a shard of ice through his heart. Or, Ace picked up the darker thread, his gaze wary. Or was she involved with them? The idea was monstrous, yet the evidence was ambiguous. Her arcane skill, her sudden reappearance coinciding with these major shifts, her potential Moonrat ties, could she have been leveraging one shadowy faction against another? Could her knowledge have been sought not by the Myster, but by this older, perhaps more powerful group? Could she have used the Ravenshadows, or even been one of them? The narrative fractured. Was Elysia a victim, a pawn, a collaborator, or a master manipulator, caught between rising powers? The answers, it seemed, might lie not just in the past, but in the desolate, cursed ruins of the Aviary District, the potential lair of the Ravenshadows themselves. The emergence of the Ravenshadows as the likely executioners of the Moonrats threw the Shadow Myster's role into confusing relief. His rise coincided perfectly with these events, suggesting involvement, yet the brutality and near-supernatural efficiency described didn't quite match the Meister's known methods of gradual infiltration, bribery, and targeted intimidation. So where does the Meister fit in this? Ace muttered, scratching his beard, trying to reconcile the timelines. He starts his climb just as Elysia appears. Then the Moonrats, her contacts, get wiped off the map by these Ravenshadows. Did the Meister hire the Ravenshadows to clear the way for him? Paying mythical assassins to eliminate a minor guild seems excessive, unless the Moonrats, with Elysia's potential knowledge, posed a unique threat to his plans. Gerrod considered this. Or perhaps the Meister and the Ravenshadows were temporary allies, working together to remove a common obstacle. The Moonrats might have known too much about both their operations. The idea of two such dangerous, shadowy forces collaborating, even briefly, was chilling. There's another possibility, Ace offered grimly. What if the Meister wasn't allied with the Ravenshadows? What if he was a rival? Maybe the Ravenshadows wiping out the Moonrats wasn't for the Meister, but despite him. Maybe he benefited from the chaos, used the power vacuum they created to solidify his own position while they faded back into the shadows. He shook his head. Or maybe he was a survivor himself. Part of some faction within the Moonrats who cut a deal, betrayed the rest to the Ravenshadows to save his own skin, and used the opportunity to build his own empire from the ashes. The Meister's role became ambiguous. Was he the mastermind who hired legendary killers? A fortunate opportunist riding the wave of destruction? Or a cunning survivor who betrayed his own to rise to power? His connection to the Temptress, who used Moonrat methods yet seemed far more powerful, further complicated the picture. Unraveling the Meister's true relationship to the Moonrat's fall and the enigmatic Ravenshadows felt crucial to understanding the forces truly at play. Gerrod stood frozen, the dim light of their safe house casting long shadows that seemed to writhe like snakes around the leaning stacks of forgotten lore. The Ravenshadow symbol on the broken blade fragment felt cold in his mind's eye, colder even than the dank air. The timeline Ace had laid out, Elysia's return, the Meister's rise, the Moonrat's annihilation by the Ravenshadows, echoed with chilling precision. He kept seeing his mother's arcane signature shimmering over the palace blueprints. Ace paced restlessly, muttering theories about the Meister's role. Maybe he paid them off, maybe he lucked out. Or maybe, Gerrod interrupted, his voice unnaturally quiet, hollow, maybe we are looking at it backwards. He turned slowly to face Ace, his expression a mask of dawning horror. The Ravenshadows. You said they were legend, masters of stealth, brutal, almost supernatural. He gestured vaguely in the timeline, the symbol, the blueprints. My mother possessed unique arcane knowledge, power that bordered on... He couldn't finish the thought. He took a shaky breath. Her return coincided not just with the Meister, but with the destruction of the Moonrats, the very people she contacted. What if she wasn't their victim? The words felt like poison on his tongue. What if the whispers about her exile were incomplete? What if her true allegiance wasn't to some defunct thieves' guild, but to something older, darker? He looked directly at Ace, his eyes wide with a terrible, dawning suspicion that warred with every fiber of his being. Ace, what if Elysia wasn't caught between these forces? His voice dropped to a ragged whisper. What if she was the force? What if my mother was Ravenshadow? The question hung in the dead air, monstrous, unthinkable, yet born from the cold, hard lines of the fragmented history they had uncovered. Ace recoiled as if struck. Gerrod's whispered question hanging like a physical weight in the dusty air. Elysia? Ravenshadow? The idea was so profoundly wrong, so fundamentally at odds with Gerrod's lifelong image of his mother, that Ace couldn't immediately process it. Yet, the timing, the power, the ruthless efficiency of the Moonrat massacre, a cold dread trickled down his spine. Could arcane skill and hidden darkness twist someone so completely? He shook his head, trying to dispel the image. That's madness, Gerrod. But his voice lacked conviction. The pieces fit together with terrifying, albeit monstrous, logic. Regardless of Elysia's true allegiance, victim, mastermind, or mythical assassin, the path forward led inexorably towards the symbol etched on the broken blade. The stylized wing and shadow pointed them, however tenuously, towards the one place whispered in connection with the Ravenshadows, the one place marked with a similar symbol on the old maps. The Aviary District, Gerrod stated, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual resolve, though now overlaid with a chilling determination. The symbol matches. The legends, the timing. If the Ravenshadows are real, if they hold the key to what happened to the Moonrats, to Elysia's fate, or even to the Myster's origins, the answers must lie there. Ace nodded grimly, the image of the desolate, cursed district vivid in his mind. A haunted ruin filled with ghosts and bad memories. Sounds about right for this whole mess. He looked towards the theoretical destination. What secrets does that place hold? About your mother? About these feathered killers? About how the Myster crawled out of the wreckage? They gathered themselves, leaving the safety of the cellar behind. The weight of their discoveries, the blueprints, the cipher wheel, the Ravenshadow symbol, the devastating questions about Elysia settled upon them. They stepped out into the cool night air, turning their faces towards the eastern edge of the city, towards the shunned, dilapidated Aviary District. What awaited them there, amidst the ruins and rumors, was unknown, but it was the only place left that might hold the truth.
The pieces are falling into a horrifying mosaic. Elysia, the Moonrats, the Shadow Myster, and the mythical Ravenshadow assassins all are threads in a single dark tapestry woven decades ago. Gerrod's quest has led him to the most monstrous possibility of all, that his mother was not a victim, but the predator. Now, only one path remains. A trail of whispers and a faded symbol on a map lead to the cursed Aviary District, the rumored roost of the Ravenshadows themselves. What truth awaits in that desolate place? And is Gerrod prepared to face the face behind the mask? Find out in Chapter 11, The Face Behind the Masks. Don't miss the revelation. Subscribe now.